Good evening, everybody. It's good to have you guys here. We had a great weekend great Saturday last week. Chris Lowen here was preaching, and that was great. In order to preach here at this church, your name does have to be Chris, just so you know. So just to keep that clear, and we want to keep that rolling as long as we can. No, just kidding. But anyway, so last week he did a great job there, ending off our series on barriers to the 92. And today I want to start a four-part series study on the book of Ecclesiastes. And we're going to study what Ecclesiastes has to say about finding happiness and meaning in life. And again, for those of you who are following online, we're so glad to have you. But I want to start by reading the first few verses from chapter 1. Very famous introduction to this book of Ecclesiastes. And it starts off with this: the words of the teacher. Now, the teacher is a writing, tool, an instrument that the author of Ecclesiastes is using. So the author is separate from the teacher. So in the last chapter, actually, of Ecclesiastes, the author is going to make some comments about what he thinks of the teacher's teaching. Okay? But anyway, the words of the teacher, son of David, usually it's assumed traditionally that it's Solomon. It doesn't need to be Solomon. It's fine if we think that, but it doesn't need to be him. King in Jerusalem. And then he says this, okay? Meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Now, this last week, I watched a little YouTube video from the Bible Project. And by the way, write that down if you want to look it up. The Bible Project does great videos on YouTube. If you want to show your kids stuff, they give overviews of different books of the Bible and all kinds of stuff. And they do a really good job. It's good stuff. But I showed one of my daughters the YouTube video for the overview of Ecclesiastes and this whole thing of meaningless. And at the end of the 8-minute video, she's like, "This is depressing," okay? "And how is this in the Bible?" She was like shocked, right? And it is meaningless. What? How is this in the Bible? Everything's meaningless. Life is meaningless. And then but he's not done. In fact, he's going to do this over and over again throughout an entire book of the Bible. But then he goes on to say, "What do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning to its course." And he goes on, but we'll just skip ahead to verse 11. "No one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them." And so this is one of the beautiful things I love about the Bible, is that you get these, there's different perspectives with which we can look at life, okay? So there's some things in the Bible, like Jesus is God and he died and rose again. It's really black and white. There's only one way to see this, okay? But then when it comes to life, there's different perspectives of how we can look at life. That's just true. And Ecclesiastes is part of a biblical, wise way of looking at life. But I think often as Christians, we ignore the Ecclesiastes view and we want to major in some other views. But Ecclesiastes has a really important perspective on life for us. And so if we go back again to those first two verses, I want to talk about this word of meaningless. Meaningless, says the teacher, because this is a word that's going to pop up over and over and over again throughout the book of Ecclesiastes. And it comes from the Hebrew word havel, okay? And really, havel, meaningless there isn't really an English word that totally captures what havel is, okay? But if you go into a concordance and you look up what is the definition of havel? Havel literally means it's like a vapor, a mist, smoke. So when it says meaningless, now the English translators have put it in meaningless because it would be weird, the words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem, vapor, says the teacher, utterly vaporous, okay? But that's the idea of the word, okay? It's meaningless, but it's not really meaningless. Like what we mean by the word meaningless is not totally the same, but it's this idea of life, and everything in life is like a vapor. It's like smoke. And if you try to grab a hold of smoke, how do you grab a hold of smoke? You can't grab a hold of it. It just squeezes through your fingers, right? It blows away very easily. And that is the entire idea of the book of Ecclesiastes, is that life is like a vapor. It's like a mist. It's like a smoke. It's here today and gone tomorrow. It's temporary. And happiness, if you try to grab onto it, it's like a vapor, a mist, or a smoke. It's hard. It's not something you can grab onto, or meaning in life. Where Ecclesiastes is going to drive home this point that life is, and many of the things in life are havel, vapor, breath, or smoke. Now, the fact that everything in life is temporary is both good news and bad news, right? I mean, the bad news is good things are temporary. Okay, so, that's the bad news. So you save up and you save up and you save up for your dream vacation, right? And then you go on this trip, and hopefully it's wonderful and you're not food poisoned the whole time. I know people who have gone on dream trips and then gotten food poisoned. It was terrible, but hopefully you have a good time on the trip. And then you come, but then the trip is over. You went away for 10 days, you went away for 2 weeks, you saved up for it for a long time, you look forward to it, and then it's done, right? It's a vapor, it's a mist, it's havel, right? You buy a new house, and it's like so awesome, like, oh, this is so exciting to be in this house. And then eventually it's not a new house anymore, right? And it's not exciting. And now you got to start to work on it. And now you're bothered. Oh, I wish this was different. I wish we had done this different. We should have another house, right? So that's havel. It's a vapor. It's a mist. It's temporary. Now, that's the bad news, is that good stuff is temporary. The good news of havel is that bad stuff is also temporary. Isn't that good? That's a good thing. When you get sick, most of the time, now, of course, there are some things in life that might be a lifelong sickness, or might be a sickness, or it might be a sickness that eventually takes someone's life, right? So, but even that is temporary. It still ends, and the person passes on and goes to be with the Lord if they're followers of Jesus, right? But it's temporary. In fact, one of the things I love, and I learned this from someone much older and wiser than me, I just can't remember who, maybe that's a sign of my own age, but is I often think to myself when I'm going through something hard, like this is going to be over, in a month or a year or whatever. Usually, like I remember I got a hernia surgery a few years ago. Maybe this is too much information, but I had a hernia surgery a few years ago. And by the way, if you have a hernia right now, getting that surgery is not fun, okay? You should be afraid. But I had this hernia surgery. I remember going into the hospital. I don't like hospitals. Like, I'm just squeamish about that stuff. I don't like needles. I don't like blood. Okay, I don't like to be cut. Okay, it's just a thing I have. And so I'm in the hospital. Of course, they dress you in this gown, which for someone of my length is far too short, and that's its own experience. And so you're lying in this bed, and you're getting poked, and you're in this gown that is too short. And I remember lying there in that bed, also hoping that I wouldn't know any of the nurses, because that's also a problem here in Steinbach. And, oh, by the way, I really shouldn't go here, but they wheeled me into the pre-op room, and for the most part, I didn't know any of the nurses. And then they wheeled me into the pre-op room, and then I heard this familiar voice go, "Hey, Pastor Kris," and that's just not, in that moment, for those of you who are nurses, and you're in and whatever. So, but I remember telling myself over and over again, like in a week, this is going to be like, because the doctor told me, it'll take you about a week and you'll recover. And I just remember thinking, okay, I just kept putting myself, I'm lying in this bed with the too short gown, I'm about to get cut open. I'm like, okay, 1 week from now, what am I going to be doing? But this is going to be over in a week, right? And that's something I often do. Whatever it is you're going through, no matter how terrible, at some point, it's havel, because everything in life is havel. It's a vapor, it's a mist, it's temporary, and that's also good news, because bad things, too, are havel. Well, anyway, the teacher now in Ecclesiastes is going to explore, in light of this fact that life is havel, it's a vapor, it's smoke, it's temporary. In light of the fact that life is havel, the teacher is now going to do a bunch of experiments on our behalf so that we don't have to do it. And he's going to experiment, how should we live our lives here on earth in light of the fact that life is havel. It's a vapor, it's temporary. And so the first experiment he's going to try is pleasure. So chapter 2, verse 1, he says this, "I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good." Okay, so he's going to do an experiment on our behalf. And it makes sense to try pleasure. If life is just temporary anyway, why stress? Why work hard at anything? Why, why try to do anything that could hurt yourself? Just eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. That's the kind of idea he's going to experiment on our behalf, okay? And so he goes on. So I test myself with pleasure to find out what is good. But that also proved to be, and the word there again is havel. Havel. It proved to be a vapor. I tried to grab a hold of happiness, and it slipped through my fingers. I couldn't grab it. But that also proved to be havel, meaningless. Laughter, I said, is madness, and what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine, so clearly he's not a Mennonite, and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. And so he finds out, okay, so life is havel, life is a vapor, it's temporary, it's passing, so we may as well just seek pleasure. But when he sought pleasure, it didn't give him the happiness he thought it would give him. It's like eating too much dessert. Isn't that true? Like if you get a little bit of it, it tastes so good. Like I'm thinking my mother and father-in-law are here today. And, so my mother-in-law makes the best pumpkin pie and the best chocolate pies, okay? And so for years, I've been married to Ladon, so I've been in the family now for 20 years, okay? And it's felt like just a year to my in-laws. Like it's just gone by so fast for them. But my mother-in-law makes this amazing pumpkin pie and chocolate pie. And every year, so that, a couple weeks ago was Thanksgiving, she made pumpkin pie. And the last couple of years, as I've gotten into my 40s, I've started to tell myself before I go there, and I know there's going to be one of these pies, I've started to tell myself, okay, don't eat 3 or more pieces. Now, I'm hoping that by the time I get into my 50s, maybe I'll be able to actually act on this thought. But I think the first step is just having the thought. So anyway, but every time I go there, so the first piece is so good. Like when she makes that chocolate pie, and it's the kind of, it's the chocolate and then the homemade whipped cream, but the kind of chocolate one's on that pie, and you can slap it and it jiggles just a little bit. Like that's when you know it's a good chocolate pie, right? Moving on, Havel, right? So, but you have that first piece, and it is oh so good, and you think, what a waste to not have another one. That went by too quick. It was too good. So you have the second one, and always the second one is so good as well. And then every time, and I've told myself, don't have more than 2. It's never, and then I have the third one, and within 5 minutes of me having the third one, it's an awful feeling. I need to lie down, my body goes into this sugar shock, insulin, all kinds of weird things are happening in my body, and I feel terrible the rest of the evening, right? But what is that? That is Ecclesiastes. So but I'm not the teacher, I'm not Ecclesiastes, but I'm experiencing Ecclesiastes, which is Havel. A little bit of that dessert is super good, but if you try to grab on, you try to keep that feeling going, you try to, okay, my life is temporary, so I'm just going to seek as much pleasure as I can. The more you grab for it, the more it slips through your fingers, and in the end, you end up feeling empty and bored, and the pleasure's gone, right? I mean, when you get into a hot tub, it's the same thing, right? You get into that hot tub, and at first you always want that hot tub so it's a little bit too hot, right? You don't want it a little bit, you want it so that when you get in, it kind of hurts a bit, and it's like, oh, it's that feeling, that tingly feeling. You get that all up and down your body, right? And probably not a good thing, but it feels like, oh, this is awesome. And then as you sit in there, after a couple of minutes, you lose that tingly feeling, your body starts to get used to it. It still feels really good, but it's not awesome, tingly good. And then a few minutes later, it's like, I got to get out of here, right? You start to get lightheaded and all kinds of weird, you start seeing visions. But that's too much. It's a havel, right? That's pleasure. It was so good for a moment, but you try to grab onto it, you can't hold it forever. And if that's all you do is seek pleasure, he says in the end, you just end up, it's too much of a good thing. So even though life is temporary, you can approach that temporary Havel life by trying, just don't work too much, take as much time off as you can, pleasure seek, and in the end, actually you'll find that you're no more happy. In fact, they've done a whole bunch of research on this, and one of my favorite studies that they just did recently in the last couple of years, they did a study of more than 20,000 people in the United States, and they were studying the correlation, the link between free time and happiness, and people's feeling of happiness. And what they found was there was a direct link between the amount of happiness a person felt and having free time. From no free time up to having 2 hours of free time in a day, there was a direct link of happiness was going up. But right at around 2 hours, and they did it with thousands of people, they did a study actually over the space of some amount of time, right around 2 hours, the effect leveled off, and very shortly after 2 hours, it starts to just sink. And basically, their findings in this study were, sometime after 2 hours, the more free time you have, the less happiness you have. In fact, it starts to become almost depressing. And I thought that was very interesting. That's what Ecclesiastes is talking about. Havel. So life is temporary, but if you try to hold on to pleasure and happiness by just, I'm just going to spend my whole time pleasure seeking and never working, you're going to actually end up less happy. So now the teacher of Ecclesiastes is going to try a second experiment on our behalf. So he tries pleasure seeking. That doesn't do it. So he's going to try a second. He's going to go to the other side of the spectrum. And so verse 4, he says, I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. Okay? And then he's going to go on and on of a whole bunch of other things he's going to do. But if we skip ahead to verse 11, and by the way, he's going to do some of these experiments over and over again throughout the book of Ecclesiastes. Verse 11, he says, Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless. Havel. A chasing after the wind, nothing was gained under the sun. And again, some of you are thinking like this, you're like my daughter, this is the most depressing message ever. Because you took us to one side and you said, okay, if you just seek after pleasure and try to work as little as you can, you're going to end up, that's going to be meaningless and unhappy. And if you go to the other side and you try to do great things with your life and you just work and work and work and you chase success, thinking that if I find success, I'm going to have a sense of meaning and fulfillment in my life. And the teacher says, that too will not bring you a sense of meaning or accomplishment or fulfillment in life. And he goes on then for a whole bunch of verses after verse 11, and he explains different reasons why that is. But I'm going to skip ahead to verse 22. Why chasing success? One reason the teacher gives for why chasing success is meaningless. And he says this in verse 22, What do people get for all the toil and anxious striving with which they labor under the sun? All their days their work is grief and pain. Even at night their minds do not rest. This too is meaningless. And his point there is, and we've all seen this, right? We've all seen this done. Someone, in their desire to be successful, could be successful for themselves, could be they want to be successful for their family, could be they even want to be successful for God. But in their seeking after doing great things, they spend all their life working hard and under a heavy burden of stress, and they can't sleep at night. There's this toxic sense of this heavy load, this toxic sense of stress that is just weighing them down. And then you get to the end of your life, and he says, now you look back, you have had this one life to live, and you spent the whole thing, you were working for something that was going to be so grand, and now a whole big chunk of your life is gone, and you experienced almost no happiness in that chunk of life. And he says, how meaningless is that? How sad is that? That's what the teacher says. How sad is that? And so the question then is, well, what then does the teacher want us to do? He doesn't want us just to seek pleasure. He doesn't want us just to work and work and work and work and work ourselves almost to death. So what does he want us to do? Well, in verse 24 and 25, this is the first time he's going to say this in the book of Ecclesiastes, something that he's going to repeat throughout, but he's going to give us this answer. A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. So notice, it's not that they stop working. It's not that they only work. But he says a person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This too, I see, is from the hand of God, for without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? And I think there's an English phrase a phrase that we would have in our culture that kind of captures that. And basically what the teacher is saying is something that we've kind of captured in our culture is, you need to sometimes stop and smell the roses. Like that's actually in the Bible, this idea that actually you need to not waste today. Don't spend all your time working for some big thing that's going to happen in the future, because who knows if that will even ever happen. And when you get to that thing in the future, if you've taken 10 or 20 or 30 years of your life to be stressed and not experience life in order to get to this point, are you going to look back and go, Havel, it's just so meaningless. So he says his advice is, okay, it's not that you don't work, because if you don't work, you're actually going to be unhappy, and science proves that now. But he's like, here's what you do. You live in today. Try to enjoy the work you have today, and make sure you have time to eat and drink and do some of the other things in life. Now, I want to put this up there because I think there's something really important. I want to make a theological statement that I think is important for us as Christians to actually just see and hear. That is an important part of what the point Ecclesiastes is making, and that is this. To stop and enjoy life is a theological good. To stop and enjoy life. Not to only stop. You have to be going in order to stop, right? But to stop and enjoy life is a theological good. Now let me tell you why I think that's an important thing for us sometimes to say in our churches. And here's the reason. The problem is guys like me. Preachers. And what we like to do is get everybody stirred up. And there's certain verses in the Bible that are easy to stir people up. And we need all the verses. And those verses are important. But there's passages like in the Gospels. You got to take up your cross and follow me. We need that verse. That's a verse that needs to be preached on. That's a verse we have to hold in the basket in tension with the entire testimony of Scripture. We don't throw that verse out. But I think what we preachers sometimes do, because it can fire up everybody in the church, is we preach about the taking up the cross, but we rarely come back and tell everybody also to bring in what Ecclesiastes has to say to us. And what can happen over time is, as Christians, we get this idea that all of life is supposed to be one big, massive sacrifice of suffering, of doing, ministry things, whatever it is, however we decide ministry, but things that aren't part of your normal life, but you do them for Jesus. And yet, Ecclesiastes is telling us here that to stop and enjoy life is actually a theological good. It's actually honoring, it's an act of worship to God. It's part of being human. So I want to put this because, I got a math degree way back from the University of Manitoba, and I feel compelled at times to try to use it to justify me spending the time and money on getting that degree. So I made a pie chart, a couple of pie charts for us this week, okay? Because I'm a math guy, and this is me using my math degree. But can you put up that first pie chart, guys? Isn't that beautiful? But here's a common Christian misconception that we have to confront, that Ecclesiastes confronts this misconception. And the misconception is Jesus wants you to spend as much time as possible doing ministry for him. So if the blue area of the pie, if the circle is the pie of your life, many Christians have this misconception: the more time, the bigger I can make that blue section, doing whatever it is, however I define ministry, and really ministry can be everything you do in your life, but we define it a certain way. The more I can do that, the happier Jesus is, and the less worldly stuff we do, like, to just watch a football game with friends or do something, whatever. The less worldly things you do, the less fun you have, that's the more spiritual person you are. And the message of Ecclesiastes is exactly opposite of that. The message of Ecclesiastes, I want to put up the second pie chart, is this, and we ask the question, what if living for Jesus means living a fully human life that fully consists of all the things he made us to do? And this is where Ecclesiastes comes in. What if pleasing Jesus is actually not about trying to unbalance my life in sort of a weird modern North American way, but it's actually to live a fully human life for him? But is to work and eat and drink, praise God. And yes, okay, some ministry. Really, we can do ministry in all of this, but sure, let's put that up there, and play and rest and relationships and all of these things. And it's not that it's not that the pie chart has to be exactly, perfectly balanced like this. I think everybody, some of you will have a greater capacity for work than others, and some of you will have a greater capacity for relationships than others, and some of you will have a greater capacity for eating and drinking than others. Praise God. And that's a gift. That's what you give to the world. Okay, that's what you give. Okay, but so every person is unique, and there's no judging in this. But the point is, Ecclesiastes is telling us there's actually to stop and enjoy life, to eat and drink and enjoy my toil today. This is wisdom. So guys, I'm going to skip ahead again a couple of PowerPoints there, but I've been so looking forward to this moment, the moment when I would finally get to play the piano for you guys. And so I want to ask the question here today is, what if life was like a piece of music? Now, when I look at this keyboard, okay, I don't see any key on here labeled music. And if, as I did in the last service, now I know what I'm going to find in here this time, and I probably shouldn't touch it, so I won't. But if I would take off the precious holy red covering, I would find keys of piano, and also none of them would be labeled music. Each of these keys plays a note, but no one of these notes is music. If I play just one note on this piano, we don't have music, as any of you with children in a piano knows, right? Stop that for the love of... So if I play one note, doesn't matter which note I play. If I play this note, I don't have music. No one of these notes is music. And Ecclesiastes would tell us the same is true of your life. If you only play one note, if you only play pleasure, and you just keep playing it, you are not going to get music. Now, if you add a second note, you can get a form of music, right? It creates a feeling. You still don't really have music, right? But if you only work, you will be a very annoying person to your family and spouse. That's not music. Because music doesn't come from one note. Music is what arises from the combination of notes. In each person's life, created in God, unique. As you play with the personality He's given you and the capacities He's given you, each one unique in the way it flows together. But as you play the different notes, you start to get music. My mother did not force me to take 9 years of piano lessons for nothing. She forced me until I was 16. And that's still about the best song I can play. And I get that there are seasons in life, by the way. There are seasons in life where you don't have the balance. So there's seasons in life, and we're going to get to seasons next week because chapter 3 is all about seasons. But there's a difference between a season in your life and a chunk. There's a difference between a season where you have to just get through something and you know it's work or you're off work or whatever. There's a difference between a season and a chunk of your life where all of a sudden you look back and it's like, I have now missed a piece of my life. And what is the music of my life? See, happiness, there is no button in your life. Just like there's no button on this keyboard that says music, there's no button in your life that says happiness. And there's no button in your life that is meaning. Happiness and meaning, like music, are what arise from the combination of all the notes of what it means to be a human being. So if we go back to verses 24 and 25, and then I'm going to give you just a couple of quick tests, and we'll spend a little bit of time reflecting. But verses 24 and 25, we go back there. The teacher is telling us to live in today and play music today. Don't put off the music of happiness and meaning till some further date. He says a person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This too I see is from the hand of God, for without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? So now I want to give you two very brief things. How do I know if the music of my life is out of whack? It's pretty obvious on a piano when you're out of whack, when it's annoying. But how do I know in life? And there's probably 100 different tests we could come up with. I just want to look at two very briefly here. How would I know if the music of my life is out of whack? Well, one thing we could look at is kind of a continuum of stress. There's good stress in life, there's bad stress in life. So we could do a life check, and we could look at ourselves in this continuum. We could say, am I living in a place of toxic stress? Now, there is a place of good stress. That's excitement for new challenges, by the way. Good stress is the kind of stress that gives excitement for you to try new things, to grow, to learn, to take on challenges. It grows you as a person. We all need that. If you don't have any stress or challenge in your life, you end up with boredom and emptiness. So you need some amount of stress, that motivating, growing push in your life. But there's a whole nother level where too many of us live, which is toxic stress, where you can't sleep at night. You're constantly worried. It's not expanding you as a person in your relationships and who you are and your character, and it's not causing you to grow, it's causing you to shrink. It's hurting your relationships and it's hurting you. That's toxic stress. And then there's boredom and emptiness. There's on the other side where people have various fears or whatever it is in their life. They don't want to try anything. They just want to do nothing. And that's emptiness. We need a little bit of push out of the nest. So toxic stress, kind of excitement for challenges, boredom, that would be one thing to look at in our lives. And then there's a second thing, a very simple one. This one's also going to come up in Ecclesiastes in one of the chapters, in chapter 5. But here's a very simple question for us to ask to see if the music of happiness and meaning, if enough notes are being played, and that is this one. Do you have friends? Do you have friends? Not just do you have a job, do you have coworkers that you like, do you have family? That family's good too, right? And it's nice if your spouse is your friend. It's much better than if he or she is your enemy, for sure. But do you have friends? Do you have time, capacity, and space for friends? This is part of a life. This is Ecclesiastes is going to get to that friendship thing specifically, but do you have friends? Or are you weighed down by toxic stress or boredom or loneliness? Well, let's take just a couple minutes now and reflect. I'll put a couple of questions up there for you just to think about, because I know nobody needs homework to bring home. So let's just take 30 seconds and just do a little self-check here right now. And I'm going to pray, and then LaDon's going to come up and hopefully not stump me too bad with some questions. But life check. Are there notes missing in your life right now? And maybe it's just a season. That's okay. It's not about feeling guilt. Ecclesiastes isn't about making us feel guilty. The teacher himself did experiments. It's okay to experiment. It's okay to get it wrong. But the point is, life checker, are there notes missing in your life? Are you experiencing either of toxic stress or boredom? Do you have friends? And lastly, is there, and I've capitalized small. One of the things, if I've learned anything in 43 years of life on this earth, it's that none of us can radically change our lives overnight. And if you make radical changes, they won't last. It's best, the Holy Spirit is not looking for you to make multiple steps this week. He's probably only asking you to take one teeny tiny one. But is there a small next step you might want to take this week out of this Ecclesiastes first message? Why don't you bow your heads with me and close your eyes, and let's just lift this up to the Lord. Father in heaven, thank you that you do not condemn us. Thank you that you're not mad at us. Thank you for the book of Ecclesiastes, which actually shows us some of the way to live a fully human life that glorifies you, Jesus. And I pray that as a church, we can encourage each other in the weeks and months and years ahead to be humans that reflect your glory. In your precious name, Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Well, aren't you glad he hired a worship leader? You could have actually practiced something and wowed them. He's actually he can play.
Not really.
Well, you should surprise him at Christmas.
Yeah,
There
Christmas.
you go, set a goal. Okay, so I was wondering if you are actually qualified to preach this topic because you literally never feel stress. Maybe there was a 4-month period a number of years ago where you felt a little stressed, but...
Or last year.
Oh, okay. But in general...
Thanks for bringing that up.
In general, everything makes you feel happy. So
Yeah.
Anyway, and everything makes me feel stressed. In fact, my question was, what does someone like me do where the thing that actually can bring me the greatest happiness is also the thing that can bring me the most stress?
Like, for example?
Well, like I love tasks and like having lots of tasks, and then there's too many tasks, and then I curl up in the ball.
Yeah. That's a good question. Actually, I love that you brought this up, is because I think personality, and the beauty of, one of the reasons I love you coming up and asking these questions is just because it's so easy to preach theory, and then wrestling with it, right, is a little different than just the theory. So I think it's true. It's for sure true that there's different personalities, and different personalities will feel stress easier, and different personalities will feel stress less easy. And I think we just have to understand that about ourselves and give ourselves a little bit of a break on that too. But I think we also need connections, right?
Right.
And I think hopefully sometimes I'm helping you to lessen your stress. Not
Right,
increase.
connections that help you feel, that take some of that away, right?
Yeah.
That help you see perspective. Yeah, and I would also say like actually learning what does happiness mean, right? And like you said, stopping and smelling the roses, but what does that actually even mean to smell the roses in a way that makes it feel like, oh, I feel happy right now. Like what does happiness actually mean?
Yeah.
Do you have an answer?
Not really. I guess it'll come up in the rest of the series. I'm sure it'll be
okay.
there.
Good.
Note
there
to
you go.
self.
Yeah.
Well, and it's also as you get older, right? Like we're not old, but you're
Yeah.
almost 43 and I am 43, but you also have to learn your own capacity. Isn't it true? Like how many times have you taken on, your propensity would be in your younger years would be to take on way too much.
Yeah.
And then be under toxic stress.
Okay, so that's kind of like stepping back, self-reflection, right? Like, what am I doing? Capacity. Can I actually handle this? And then increasing your joy capacity, like increasing your, like, being able to feel happiness, like going on a trip and actually soaking in the moment so that you can take it home and not just feel like, oh, that was a waste of money, right? But actually going back to memories, maybe. That's like a big thing, yeah. What would you say to people where they can't get out of a situation that is just kind of toxic? Like maybe a work environment that is just, they can't get out of it for whatever reason and it's just really heavy.
Yes. Okay, that is a very good question, which is, I think the greatest blessing in life, or one of the greatest blessings in life, not the greatest, but one of the greatest, is to be able to work a job that you love. So I love what I get to do, so I love it. So, and anybody who gets to work a job that they love, that is such a blessing, isn't it? But the fact of the matter is, lots of people in this world, and in many countries around the world, will never have an opportunity to do a job that they naturally love. Well, the answer to that is not to just not work, because we've seen Ecclesiastes, and science shows us that doesn't lead to happiness either. So, you're one of the lucky ones if you get to do a job you love. But then we all have to have a job or of some kind, whether we're getting paid for it or not, right? Some kind of purpose and meanings, work. So then learning the skill of trying to find the good in that job I have and to grow and being able to appreciate it is a gift. And that's in Ecclesiastes. It's a gift from God to be able to enjoy, to learn to enjoy whatever job you're in.
Yeah, not easy.
No.
Okay, one kind of last question, because our kids aren't here in this one, so I didn't ask it before. But like, for parents, do you have like a 30-second, how do you help them, like how do we as parents coach our kids with this Ecclesiastes? Like to have enough, like we're helping our oldest now find a job, right? We know for her.
She just got it.
Yeah, she needs to get a job, right? Mm-hmm. How do we encourage our kids to work and have balance with play, or, what does that look like?
I'll let you know in a few years when our experiment is done. When we're in the middle of the experiment.
Sure. I guess, fair enough.
I think our kids are going to watch us. That's what I believe,
Yeah.
and probably mostly do a lot of what we do.
Yeah. Well, and I was thinking maybe personality comes into that,
Yeah.
right? One child you might have to encourage in one direction, and one child you might have to encourage in another direction, right? But
Yeah, we have a
But
child
always-
you have to push, and a child we have to pull.
yeah, there you go.